And I can see that the Ambassador Mark Regev is now with us. Good morning, Mark. Nice to see you. Welcome. And oops, I think we need to unmute you. Oh no, you're not unmuted.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you. Welcome.
I'm happy to be with you. Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
And I can see people are rapidly coming into the Zoom, so we'll give them a few minutes. And maybe whilst, before we've got questions from all over the country, and they come into lots of different categories, and I'm sure you've been answering many questions over the last couple of weeks. I know I've watched you in meetings all over the country. But before that, I think you made a point of going and visiting many small communities.
That's true, but obviously since coronavirus struck, much less so. But what I would always try to do is to visit communities outside the Greater London area, because I understood that this is important. It's actually very interesting when you go to a smaller community. First of all, I've learned that many of the smaller communities here have histories going back centuries. Yes.
Indeed. I mean, we've got a lovely picture of you when you visited the Exeter community, and we've got Exeter. We've got Brian from Exeter. I'm sure you remember. And I was talking to JJ in Bristol just this week, and he was telling me about your visit there as well. So that's fantastic that you've got around the country, and I know your predecessors have similarly got around the country, but I think you've done quite a bit. Right. So welcome to everybody. I'm going to ask people, and if you have your chat open, Fiona, who is helping me run the session this morning, might send some messages to ask people to do things. If you could, if you know how to do it, if you could update your name so that Mark can see on the screen where you're all from. In our regular weekly meeting, I have to tell you that since the beginning of lockdown, I thought that was going to put our program, on hold completely. And about a week into it, I discovered, like everybody else, Zoom, and we started doing a weekly leaders meeting. And we've had attendance in our meeting from Aberdeen all the way down to Exeter. And now joining us as well, we have from Belfast all the way over to Ramsgate as well, to the Thanet community there. So all points of the country, and it's been the silver lining of this dark cloud of coronavirus. It's so wonderful, and today to have everybody joining us so regularly and being involved and listening to some great people who are very important to us as small communities. Jewish small communities represent 20% of the total Jewish population. That's twice the size of Manchester. And it's an amazing number of people. And we're going out live on YouTube this morning. And I hope there's going to be a lot of people on there as well. I'm going out to a much wider audience. Normally this meeting is just the leaders, but today it's completely public. And it'd be very interesting to see. Like I say, we've got questions from all over the country, falling into lots of categories. And of course, the hot topic, which we'll come to in a little while, we've got anti-Semitism in there, we've got annexation, but we've also got questions on education and Israel in general. So I'd like to start the first question, and you were very keen for people to send in these questions, so thank you very much for asking them. And so, Ambassador, what about UK-Israel relations? We've just had a lot going on in the Labour Party, and now we've got a brand new leader. So has the relationship between Israel and the British Labour Party changed since the election of Keir Starmer?
So first of all, thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I enjoy this sort of thing where we can have a conversation. Obviously, it's always better to meet people in the flesh if you can't, but if you can, but obviously we can't, and this is a good second best, and it gives us a forum to talk, and I'm happy to do it. And if I don't answer a question, I want you to come back and say, but you didn't answer this part of the question, and I'll be as open as I can be. So on the larger question of UK-Israel relations, I think we're in a very good place. If I look at the 4.5 years that I've been here as ambassador, if you look at any of the criteria that you judge a relationship between two countries, we're seeing positive momentum. We've seen movement in the right direction. We've seen growth. If you look at trade, I mean, obviously this year trade is down because of coronavirus, but if we looked at all the figures from when I arrived here in 2016 until the figures for the end of last year, we saw every year, I believe, a constant increase in UK-Israel trade. It's about £9 billion. That's a lot. And I'll tell you the truth. For Israel, our most important export market on the planet is the United States of America. And after the United States, vying for second place is China and the United Kingdom. Some years China is number 2, and some years the United Kingdom is number 2. But that only shows how important the trade relationship is for both sides, because Israel has a larger scope of economic relations with the United Kingdom than we do with France or with Italy or with Germany or with Spain. You are our number 2 or number 3 trading partner on the planet. And as I said, every year that I've been here, that I've seen the figures of, every year we reach a new record. Every year trade goes up. And that's jobs, that's prosperity, both in Israel and in the UK. And it's an amazing story of success. I'll tell you a story. I'm very close here with the Indian High Commissioner. She recently finished her post, but she invited me to the Indian National Day, which is their Yom Ha'atzmaut, it's their Independence Day. And she gave a speech. And in her speech, she said that last year, India-UK trade relations were £20 billion. So I was sitting in the corner and listening to her remarks, and I started to smile because I thought, India, huge India, yes, the second most populous country on the planet, a subcontinent, a country that has a huge historic relationship with Britain, yes. We're almost half of that, and we're tiny Israel, the size of Wales, Israel with only 9 million people. We're half of India and growing. And so the trade relationship is in a good place, and the trajectory is even better. Israeli high-tech, Israeli conceptual products, Israeli innovation, that marries very well with British industry, with British excellence. And we're really seeing the trade relationship between the two countries moving in a very positive direction. On the national security side, I think cooperation today is probably closer than it's ever been before. I went up recently, I was at RAF Waddington. You'll have to tell me, do we have a small Jewish community near RAF Waddington? Anyway, I was there.
Look it up.
I was there because we had a group of Israeli Air Force pilots who came here to train with their British counterparts to do a joint exercise. And we didn't do that sort of thing in the past. We're doing it today. Israeli Air Force pilots doing joint exercises with the RAF, Air Force to Air Force cooperation. And it's not just between the Air Forces, it's in the other branches of the military. And we are seeing a closer security cooperation than ever before, which is very exciting. You know, if I can speak frankly, our Israeli Air Force pilots are pretty good. And they know they're pretty good. Some Israelis would even say they're probably a bit cocky sometimes, our Air Force pilots, but they know that their counterparts at the RAF are also very good. And by training together, they are even better. And the citizens of both our democracies are better protected when our air forces are more professional, and through that cooperation, we are doing so. You should also know the intel to intel cooperation in counterterrorism, in cyber, and other crucial areas of national security. Very, very strong security, national security relationship. I can tell you, and it'll make you smile, because with the Israeli Air Force is part of the Israeli military and all food has to be kosher. I think we brought a kosher caterer down from Manchester to be at RAF Waddington for the week of the exercise to make sure there was strictly kosher food for all the Israeli Air Force personnel, for the pilots and the crews. Another thing that I think shows the new strength in the relationship between Israel and the UK, of course, was the royal visit. Now, if I can speak very frankly, for many years, my predecessors would hand invitations proposing the idea that there could be a visit by a senior British royal to Israel. And it never worked out. It was never the right time. And some Israelis actually thought there was some sort of unofficial boycott or something, because we'd see the British royal family, they'd go to many of our neighbors, they'd go to Jordan, they'd go to the Gulf, they'd go to Saudi Arabia, and we wouldn't see them in Israel. That all changed. In 2018, when Prince William came to Israel, that was a breakthrough visit. And I accompanied him, and it was an amazing visit. There was an energy and electricity around the visit. And then earlier this year, before coronavirus hit, Prince Charles visited Israel as part of the commemoration for the 75 years to the liberation of Auschwitz. And so after not having official royal visits for quite some time, we've had two in the last 3 years. And it shows that's symbolic, I think, of the new place where Israel-UK relations are. So as I will finish my term shortly here as ambassador, I can tell you that our relationship is good, and it's moving in a positive direction. We should appreciate this and know this, because all of you, I know, are aware that it wasn't always like that. I mean, when the British mandate ended in 1948, and the Union Jack was lowered, and Ben Gurion declared independence, and the Israeli flag was raised, relations weren't particularly good. The mandate ended with a lot of tension between Brits and Israelis. The Brits weren't happy about the underground activity, the struggle to get them to leave. And many Israelis, many Jews thought the British, by closing the borders of the homeland during the terrible years of the Holocaust, by adopting a white paper which basically put the Jewish national home on hold, yes, in the years that it was most required, it was most necessary, when we were most in need. There was not a bad feeling from our side towards the British as well. I remember my father used to say that if Israel would have been established not in 1948, but in 1938, yes, just 10 years before, how many people could we have saved? And so we started off not having a good relationship. If we look at those early years, 48, 49, there was a lot of tension in the relationship. I'm glad to tell you that today it's a completely different story.
And can I ask you, and people have looked at Israel as possibly the place to go, because they've been worried here in this country with the rise of anti-Semitism generally, but also within politics. Has that worry now, do you think, receded for us here living in the UK because we have a different relationship with the Labour Party?
So I'll answer generally and then specifically afterwards. I remember I accompanied the Israeli Prime Minister to France after there was the terrible attacks there on French Jews. And he came to France to express solidarity with the French Jews after they'd been through a particularly difficult time. And I think when he spoke at the synagogue there in Paris, he was speaking for all Israelis when he said the following. He said, Jews have the right to live wherever they choose, in safety and in freedom. And let's be clear, the British government is a partner in that effort, yes? If we see how the British government stands up against anti-Semitism, how the British government supports groups like CST, the British government has been a partner in this, but Jews have the right to live wherever they choose in safety and in freedom to carry out their traditions and to live as communities and so forth. But Jews today also have a right that was denied them for many decades, centuries. And that is the right to return to the ancient homeland. And it's a right that if they choose to exercise, we of course look at them as returning brothers and sisters. But that ultimately is a very personal decision for people to make. When I speak to young people in this country, I talk about my story, how I grew up in Australia and immigrated to Israel, and look where I am now, that Israel is a country of opportunity. Israel is very exciting. I can tell you something a bit tongue-in-cheek, but when I speak to young British Jews, I say the following. I say, according to the World Bank data, Israel is now equal to the UK in GBT per capita. And according to trends, it's possible we'll even pass the UK in GBT per capita. And then they also say, according to the UN Happiness Index, Israel is one of the more happy countries on the planet. I think we're either 13 or 14 on the last count. We're well ahead of Britain. So I tell them, if Israelis are more prosperous and more happy than Brits, maybe that's a reason to live in the country.
So I think you carefully avoided the Labour Party.
I can answer it if you like. I'm happy to answer it if you like. I don't want to avoid anything. I said I will answer all your questions.
Well, I think people are interested because they were very worried about the situation and Keir Starmer coming into place and doing much more to tackle the anti-Semitism, or at least the feeling of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, has made many people in this country feel have a different approach to that, and perhaps they're not so quick now to think actually we need to pack our bags. I mean, as Jews for millennia we've been packing our bags. And do you think now that relationship, which was very strong in the past between the Israeli Labour Party and the UK Labour Party, and now seems to have, had a rocky time, do you think that is in a better place?
I think it could well be. If you look at the last 4 Labour Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom, okay, that's Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown. I think I can say unequivocally all of them were friends of Israel, all of them. Harold Wilson wrote a book about his friendship for Israel and about the Israel-UK relationship. And so you have a tradition in this country, in Labour, of friendship and solidarity with Israel. Supporting and being a friend of Israel was and should be a part of a traditional Labour value. As you know, you said strongly there was a strong relationship between UK Labour and Israeli Labour. A very strong partnership between the two movements. I hope that the new Labour leadership will see a return to that sort of fundamental solidarity between Israel and the UK.
Thank you, Ambassador. Like I said, we've got questions from all over the place. And our youngest questioner, I really feel I want to get these questions in. He actually asked 4 questions, and I'll put them all to you, and you can answer them in any way you like. And I can remind you if you need reminding of which they are. So David, he's in Stoke-on-Trent. He's 16 years old, and he says Israel's a small country. How's it going to deal with population growth? And then he also goes on, thinking about the kibbutz movement, does it have a future? And how is climate change affecting Israel? And finally, he says, how have Jews from countries like Ethiopia and Russia contributed to the country? And I think he's thinking that, they form distinct groups, and there may be problems as well as benefits within those areas of the community within Israel. So population growth, kibbutz, climate change, and the culture of different countries, the Jews coming from Ethiopia and Russia.
So Israel is now 9 million people, and we're geographical size the size of Wales. And so in Tel Aviv in the area is quite dense, but not overly so. And as you know, outside the center of the country, you even have a lack of population. In the Galilee and the Negev, there's a lot of room to grow. And so Israel wants to continue to grow. We think it's important, and we want to do that. And I think in the years to come, we will continue to grow. Israelis have got larger families. Israelis have more children, not just the ultra-Orthodox, who we all know have large families, but even regular secular Israelis or traditional Israelis. It's a very, my sister's a child psychologist, and she says there's something about Israeli culture which is very focused on children, which you don't have in all the other Western countries. It's one of our strengths, I think. And so to answer the question, we want to see the population continue to grow. I mean, if you just think about 9 million, so today, Israel, if you think, say 9 million people in Israel speak Hebrew. So that means more people speak Hebrew today than many European languages. More people speak Hebrew than Finnish or Slovak or Slovenian. More people speak Hebrew than, I think, Bulgarian or Norwegian. In other words, 9 million people is serious. When the Jewish state was established in May 48, we were 600,000. 9 million we're a small country, but we're not the smallest. You know, a lot of European countries are smaller than us, and we're growing. And it's a good thing, because as we grow, we're stronger. As a society, as an economy, it's important.
So
on the issue of immigration, there's no doubt. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say that. So what you're saying is that we're not going to be an overcrowded country, and we think fondly of the kibbutz movement, but that seems to have disappeared, and that whole communal way of life. Is there a future for it, or has it gone now forever?
So I spent, like many people of my generation, I think I was altogether like 7-8 years on a kibbutz. My wife was born on a kibbutz. And obviously both of us made a choice to live outside a kibbutz, yes? And so there's no doubt the kibbutz movement is not what it used to be. But the kibbutz movement is changing. Some kibbutzim have stayed in the more traditional socialist framework. Other kibbutzim are innovating and experimenting with more dynamic social frameworks. I think the kibbutzim will continue to survive. I think there's a question mark on how they will look as kibbutzim in the years to come. I mean, they've got many things that they're very attractive: the education system, the country lifestyle, the economic security it gives its members, and so forth. But they have to compete now with an Israeli society which is increasingly successful. And that's a challenge for them. And they have to provide things that the people in the city haven't got. Otherwise, and we'll see. It's an open question. There's no doubt that they made a huge contribution to Israel in the past. To what extent they'll be making a contribution in the future depends on their ability to be relevant in the coming years. There was a question about the Russians and the Ethiopians. Israel is a country of immigration.
Yes. Is that benefit or conflict?
Definitely benefits. There's no doubt that it benefits Israel. One of the reasons Israel is such a creative society, that Israel is such a dynamic society, is that people have come from all across the planet, and they bring with them their traditions and their heritage, and that makes Israel a very dynamic society, a very energetic society, where you have people bringing different things to the table, and then you have a synthesis between the different things, and it makes life very exciting. If you look at that immigration of the Russians, almost 1 million people who came in the space of a few years. And let's be frank, in the early times, it was very difficult. People were living in huts and housing for people, and there was unemployment. But if you look back, it's been an amazing success story. With the Ethiopian immigration, a little more challenging sometimes, because they had special issues, and there's still concern about poverty in some of the Ethiopian communities. But I'm proud to tell you that this new Israeli government, for the first time, we've got a minister who's from the Ethiopian heritage. She's the Israeli Minister of Immigration. And it's great to see Ethiopian Jews reach the very top in politics and in other areas as well. And I think we'll see more of that in the years to come. I remember I did an event here in London. We had the visiting Israeli at the time Minister of Defense, who was Russian born. And I had to introduce him to an audience here. And I said, just think about this. The Israeli Minister of Defense, who's the number 2 in the Israeli government, yes? The Prime Minister is number 1 in our system. In many ways, the Defense Minister is number 2, yes? I said, he's born in the former Soviet Union. And I'm the UK ambassador, Israel's ambassador to the UK, which is one of our most senior positions in the Israeli Foreign Service. And both of us are immigrants. What does that say about Israel? What does that say about Israel's ability to allow immigrants to move ahead, to advance? In other words, if all countries have glass ceilings, all countries have, the old boys networks and so forth. In Israel, exist as well, but maybe less so, maybe much less so. If you have immigrants who can move up in upwardly mobile as you can in Israel, I think it says something about the country.
Let me just go from that, talking about the Ethiopians, to the very hot topic now, which is Black Lives Matter, and how much that is impacting, because we do read about problems with darker skinned Jews, Ethiopians, in Israel, and even within our community here in the UK, people take a second look, and maybe that's, you know, not particularly nice. So Black Lives Matter is impacting all across the world at the moment. How is it impacting with in Israel?
So I'd like to tell you that there's no racism in Israel whatsoever, but of course I can't. You have, in all societies, you have racism, and you can find pockets of it also in Israel. And as you know, Ethiopian Jews are African, but you've also got Jews from the Indian subcontinent who are also very dark. You've got Jews from Yemen who are also very dark skinned. I can tell you this, that as a society, as a government, we're committed to eradicating all forms of racism and racial discrimination. There were demonstrations, it was a year ago or so, where Ethiopian Jews, there was an incident where a young Ethiopian was killed by a police officer in questionable circumstances. And there was a whole thing of, was this racism in the police? And there were massive demonstrations in Israel by the Ethiopian community. Look, these things, problems aren't solved by ignoring them. You have to tackle the problem. And I said when I was talking about the Ethiopian immigration, just as you've got many Ethiopians who are officers in the army and who, as I said before, in politics doing well, you do have pockets of poverty and people not moving ahead. And as the rest of the society moves ahead, if they're not moving ahead, they're falling behind. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that Israel is a home and a good home for everyone. And here I can tell you, obviously the Israeli government has a responsibility, but here I can tell you there are all sorts of programs being done by British Jews to help the more people, the disadvantaged in Israel, and it's greatly appreciated. I have a close friend here who donates scholarships every year to, I think it's 10 students of Ethiopian background at an Israeli university and so forth. We are committed, yes, to making sure that everyone can succeed in Israel. Ultimately, Israel is, by any objective criteria, an amazing success story. Yes, if you think of where we were in 1948 and where we are today in 2020, it's an amazing success story. The economy, the society, the demography, the culture. I always joke that I open my Netflix at night and I've been watching more television now because we haven't been going out so much because of COVID-19, yes. How many Israeli programs does one find on Netflix? And it's not for the Jewish community. That wouldn't make it economically viable. People are watching Israeli. How many times have people come to me and asked me about Fauda, yes? And I had to admit I hadn't seen it. So I had to one weekend watch all the Faudas because I was expected to be an expert as the Israeli ambassador. But Israel is an amazing success story by any criteria. And it's important that all Israelis can be part of that success. And if people are being left behind, like parts of the Ethiopian community, we have to double our efforts to make sure that they're not left behind and they can get on the train with everyone else as we move forward.
I think that moves us very neatly into our next topic. And several people have asked us questions around education. And you were mentioning, you know, people improving their quality of life and being helped to do that. So we have questions, Peter, who's up in Newcastle, and from Rosalind, who's in Southport. And they've asked a variety of questions. And the last one is actually about the experience in Exeter, and I'll come to that in a moment. Asking about the education of Arabic and Palestinian children and how their school books are actually influencing them with hate against Israel. Is that happening, and what are we doing to address it? Are we able to address it? Can we do anything?
So there's definitely an issue. It's not in Israeli school, of course. But if you talk about what Palestinian children are taught in their educational system, both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, Are they taught peace and reconciliation, or are they taught hatred? And unfortunately, especially in Gaza under Hamas control, but also unfortunately in the West Bank, which is under the control of the Palestinian Authority, they are taught predominantly to hate, that there's something evil about Jews, that all the negative stereotypes are in the official education system. And that's a problem. That's a problem. They even have schools named after terrorists. And if if your school is named after a terrorist, then of course the terrorist is seen as someone who is to be put up on a pedestal, yes? And this is a severe problem we face with the Palestinians. If they are not educating their younger people to reconciliation and peace, yes, it's a problem. I know my children went through the Israeli school system. My son, through the education system of Israel, joined all sorts of dialogue groups talking to Palestinians and of his own age to try to overcome barriers and so forth. But it's an issue. How do you deal with it? We've been speaking to the British government and other governments. We have less control about what goes on in Gaza, though the UN does. But on the West Bank, you've got a lot of the education system is funded by Western governments. And we say, let's use the power of the purse to say, if you're helping them fund education, so you've got to look at the curriculum. So no one wants to see Palestinian kids, in the street and not learning. We want to see them in school. We want to see them learning. But if countries like Britain, like France, like Germany, if countries are supporting in a generous way the Palestinian education curriculum, then I think there should be a demand, and there has been a demand. The question is, how well has it been implemented? That you don't have education for hate. That education is something that will hopefully encourage peace and reconciliation.
So now Rosalind's question, and she says that her son Benji ran the Israel Society at Exeter University when you visited. He helped organize that. But her question is, and I'll just read this verbatim, with universities and colleges now looking to carry out much of their teaching online, is this the time to review campus strategy before gatherings are allowed again? How can you counter more effectively the type of anti-Israel activity we have witnessed every single academic year?
Obviously, this is an issue, and we've been working closely with Jewish student societies across the United Kingdom. I myself have been, as you just said, I've often been invited to speak and make Israel's case, and I believe that's important. In traditional diplomacy, ambassadors, they go to the Foreign Office, they talk to members of parliament, they go to number 10 and have meetings, yes. But what we call public diplomacy is increasingly important. And because the other side is so active on campus, I think we have a very special obligation, because if we aren't making our voices heard on campus, that means theoretically someone in England can go to university for 3 and 4 years and only hear bad things about Israel. They'll never hear a pro-Israeli argument. And so it's crucial that we make the case on campus, and we have been in increasing numbers, working very closely with the Jewish student societies, with the Union of Jewish Students, to make the case for Israel. And I know, let's say if I go to a university and I speak, and there are 100 people in the audience, so let's presume that 20 people, they're coming just to be critical, yes? I'm not going to convince them. But there's another 2 groups of people in the audience. Some of them are the pro-Israel, the Jewish students who've come to hear me, and they know they like Israel, but they don't know all the arguments. They don't know all their, and so by coming, I'm helping to energize them, and I'm helping to strengthen their beliefs. But there's also, out of the 100 people there's also a large group of people who are coming to listen, who are open-minded, who might be a bit critical, but don't know. And once again, if I don't go, or someone like me doesn't go to campus, that means you won't have a pro-Israel voice spoken on campus. One of the first things I did when I came here in 2016, I went to SOAS. Now, SOAS is supposed to be the place where there's expertise on the Middle East. That's what they pride themselves on. That's their area of specialty. And yet we discovered that for some 12, 13 years, there had not been an official Israeli spokesperson, like an ambassador, an official Israeli representative on SOAS. And then when I was invited to speak there, of course, there was a demonstration against how can we let this terrible Mark Regev speak on our campus? And there was actually a demonstration organized against me. A lot of members of staff signed a petition, not the students, the staff, saying that Regev shouldn't speak on SOAS. but I spoke nevertheless, and I thought it was important that I spoke on SOAS. I think it's important that I speak everywhere that I'm invited to speak. It's important that Israel's voice is heard. As I said before, if we don't go, theoretically, as an English student, a British student can go to university and spend their whole 3-4 years of their degree and never hear a pro-Israel position. It's important that we do that work.
So now that leads us on to, I suppose, you know, the big topic, which is everybody's talking about, and that's annexation. So we have questions, again, from all over the country. We've got questions from Rochelle in Southport, Michael in Torquay, different Rosalind in York, and Gwendolyn in Middlesbrough, Karen also down south, and Judith in Bournemouth. And these questions come from all different perspectives. They're not from one angle whatsoever. But first of all, Rochelle asks, all the talk is of annexation. Is that the right word? And should be, and Michael says, shouldn't we stop using words like annexation and settlers? So are we using the right terminology for a start?
So the Israeli government does not use that terminology. We use the word of extending sovereignty. And the reason we think it's that's the right terminology is because the West Bank, in legal terms, is disputed territory. We have a legitimate claim there. The Palestinians also have a claim, and we've got to try to find a way to find compromise and to find coexistence. But the idea that Israel doesn't have a legitimate claim is just simply wrong. In fact, from a legal point of view, and a lot of people just don't know this. So Israel is now in the West Bank. Who was there before Israel? And the answer we all know is Jordan. But was Jordan there legally? And the answer is, well, who recognized Jordanian control of the West Bank? Well, I have to tell you, the United Nations did not. The Arab League did not. There were only 2 countries on the planet that recognized Jordanian control of the West Bank, and that was the United Kingdom and Pakistan, only 2 countries. Not the United States, not the Europeans, as I say, not the United Nations, not even the Arab League. So if Jordanian rule wasn't legitimate, who was the legitimate sovereign before then? And then the answer is very clear. It was the British Mandate. And the British Mandate, as outlined by the League of Nations, said you have the mandate for Palestine for a reason. And the reason you have the mandate is because you have a responsibility to help facilitate the growth of a Jewish national home. And it also says to encourage settlement on the land. And so that is the last internationally recognized legal sovereign of the West Bank. And so according to that basis, yes, of course, we're not occupying a foreign territory. We have legitimate claims. And therefore we think the term annexation is wrong, because the term annexation means you take something that's not yours. And I'm not saying that we're going to take it all. On the contrary, that's not the intention. We want to find solutions. We're talking about doing something that would be much smaller. But the whole idea that we're taking something that's not ours, we don't accept. It's not the way we see the issue. We see we have a legitimate claim, and that goes back historical. And I want to share with you something a lot of people aren't aware. The idea that parts of the West Bank will stay part of Israel in any final status reality, that's not a Netanyahu idea. That goes back way back to Israel's labor governments. In fact, Yitzhak Rabin, yes, Rabin, the prime minister at the time of the Oslo process, the man who signs the Oslo agreements, who believed in coexistence with the Palestinians, who believed in a historic compromise with the Palestinians. He himself said in the last speech he gave in the Knesset before he was brutally murdered by a Jewish extremist, he said that in any final status reality, Israel must remain control of the Jordan Valley, one of the areas we're talking about today, because he said that's crucial for Israel's security. Now, if Rabin believed that, this is something I think at least everyone should understand. This is something that needs to be discussed seriously and not to be dismissed. If Rabin, yes, the father of the Oslo agreements, if he believed that in final status arrangements, that the Jordan Valley had to be part of sovereign Israel, so it's something for people to think about.
So looking at understanding this from the different point of view, Gerald up in Newcastle is saying, well, you know, Boris Johnson is talking about annexation and he's saying that it breaches international law. And Rosalind in York is saying, why is Israel flouting the Geneva Convention in this way? Now, you've just put an argument and say, well, actually, the whole argument is different. But this is the discussion, and this is the prevalent tone which is taken both within ordinary discussion and in the press. So where is this going to go?
So the truth is there aren't final decisions yet taken in Israel. But I can assure you this. First of all, we want to do everything we can in coordination with our strongest ally, which is the United States. We'll be talking to our other friends and allies very closely, including the British government, and we know there's differences of opinion. We're very, very aware of our relations with our Arab neighbors, specifically Jordan, which could be affected. And we're very much aware of the importance of our relationship with Jordan and of the peace treaty with Jordan. We don't want to do anything that could shake things in a negative way. And we've got these new relations with the Arab countries. And so give the Israeli government some credit that if we're going to move ahead here, we're going to navigate this in a way that will be very measured and in a way that we believe the benefits will be more significant than any possible negative feedback. It's important to remember, yes, that in any policy decision, there are advantages and disadvantages. In the real world of politics, there's always an upside and downside, and it's important to look at them both. But if you only look at the downside, you'll never do anything. If you only look at the upside, you're being irresponsible. You've got to look at both characters. I'd also add, and I said it briefly, but it needs to be expanded on. Over the last few years, we've seen a very strong momentum in our relationship with the Arab countries. Today, Israel speaks with more Arab governments than ever before in the history of the Jewish state. It's amazing. It's countries that were in the past very critical, hostile towards Israel. Today, we've got a dialogue with them. I mean, we've got formal peace treaties with 2 Arab countries, as you know, with both Egypt and Jordan, but we're talking to a whole host of other Arab governments. As I said, more than ever before. And this is something that is very positive. It's very exciting for Israelis. The Arab world has opened up to Israel. And it's happened over the last decade under Israeli governments that have been very strong in defending Israel's rights. And in the framework also, the peace process with the Palestinians has been stalled, but it's nevertheless happening. And I expect to see that continue to happen, to see relations with the Arab world further strengthened in the years to come. If you like, I can tell you a story, a personal story, because this, first of all, in London as ambassador, I speak to Arab ambassadors that in the past, maybe I wouldn't have spoken to, or my predecessors wouldn't have spoken to. But I have to tell you a story. I have an 87-year-old mother who lives in Melbourne, Australia. And I try to visit her once a year because she's not good at traveling at her age. And when I used to take off from Ben Gurion Airport to fly east to Australia, if you can think of the map in your mind, you could never fly east from Israel because you'd have to go over Arab airspace. So you flew west out into the Mediterranean, and then you flew north or south, either up through Turkey and then east through Russia, and that's the way you'd get to Asia, or you'd go south down through Ethiopia, and then you turn east. So in 2018, for the first time in my life, I went to visit my mother, but because of the changes in Israel's relations with the Arab world, I could fly east. And I remember normally, you know, I fly a lot in my line of work, and I'm sure a lot of your people flew a lot also before the current crisis, yes? But I never look at the screen, yeah, where there's that screen on the plane where you can see the flight path of the aircraft. But I watched it very closely, and I saw we took off from Ben Gurion Airport, and we flew over the Jordan River, and we're over the country of Jordan, and then we flew over Saudi Arabia, and then we flew over Oman, and then we were out over the sea near India. We flew over 3 Arab countries. Now to tell you that a plane can take off and land from Ben Gurion Airport and fly over Arab airspace, this is something very new. And this is symbolic of the improving relationships we have with the Arab world, which, as I say, are very, very exciting. Now, you can only do that so far with foreign airlines. I did my trip on Air India. You can't yet do it with El Al, but I think that's only a matter of time now, because we're seeing a very positive momentum. We've had twice in the last month and so since COVID-19, we've had aircraft landing from the Gulf in Tel Aviv at Ben Gurion Airport to take supplies to the Palestinians. In the past, they had never had planes land at Ben Gurion Airport. So there are important changes happening, positive changes, and it's important as we move forward. We're very much aware of those relationships, and aware that we have to be navigating the path ahead very, very skillfully and with caution. One hand, you want to seize opportunities where they exist. On the other hand, you want to avoid the minefields. And that's the job that governments have to do.
And Karen, one of her questions, although she had a previous question about the morality of how the different security measures and the different ways that Israel manages its relationship with the Palestinians of the West Bank. But she also, I'll come to that in a second if we've got time, but just leading on from you talking about the flying, she says, whatever happened to the joint airport between Jordan and Israel near Eilat?
So we used to talk about it, but I think there are all sorts of issues and it never got off the ground. And what we've got now, we've got a border crossing with Eilat, and it's possible for people to cross over much easier than ever before. And I think that proved to be more feasible. So if someone wants to fly out of Israel, they come into Israel and take the plane. A joint airport is complex, and it's not by accident that you don't have a lot of countries that do have a joint airport with their neighbors. Usually there are all sorts of issues of security and sovereignty and so forth. But there was such a plan, and it never materialized. I remember when it was talked about. But if you go to the Eilat Aqaba area, you'll see a crossing that's open. You'll see literally people going back and forth, obviously less so today with COVID-19, yes. But you'll see a border crossing that's active and people crossing, as I say, every day, especially just down that part. You've got Aqaba, which is beautiful, and then just a bit north of there, you've got Petra, which is amazing. Tourists love to visit Petra, and my family's done it, and it's probably well worth doing. The benefits of peace to both sides are so strong, yes? And we should want peace for its own sake, because peace is good, yes? We all want peace. But there are so many tangible benefits, like the tourism, like the trade, which can benefit all the countries of the region. And our new relations with the Arab world, first of all, they're good in themselves. If countries that in the past saw us as their enemy today see us as their friend, even as an ally, that's a good thing. And it's good for the region, and most importantly, it's good for peace.
And she also asked, and within the community here in this country, you know, we want peace and we want Israel and its citizens and, you know, our families who live there to be safe. But there's also quite a bit of sympathy with the disruption of people's lives, with the disruption of Palestinian lives, of Arab Israelis who want to cross between the West Bank and into Israel all the time. And she says, how do we explain the morality of making people have permits just to get to their own lands? And is it an excuse that it's on security grounds?
It's definitely not an excuse, because we have to be very aware that there are security concerns, very real ones. Sometimes when someone says to me, well, why doesn't Israel just take down all the security barriers? So if we did, what would happen? And unfortunately, we know that if we didn't have the checkpoints and the security barriers, people would come into Israel and kill our people, because groups like Hamas and the other extremist groups have not given up on their very extreme radical agenda. And so we do need the security. It's not an excuse. It's not a spin. There's genuine security needs. I mean, we all remember what it was like when people actually could walk into Israel from the West Bank without going through a checkpoint, and we remember what it was like then. And you had buses blown up in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, and it was a difficult situation. We want to be as flexible as we can be. In other words, if you can maintain security but create greater flexibility on their side, yes, if you can navigate that, that's always a good thing. And we've made an effort to do so, and we've streamlined crossings, we've made them more efficient. The idea is that people shouldn't wait in lines too long, but the idea that someone who comes into Israel from the West Bank has to show an ID card, yes, and has to have a permit. I'm sorry, that can't be changed anytime soon, because that really is essential for Israeli security. You can't be like the proverbial ostrich and put your head in the sand and pretend there aren't threats. There are threats. This is why I think what I spoke about Rabin before is very important, because Because to say, oh, you're going to sign peace, you don't have a security issue anymore. There will always be a security issue. Even if tomorrow, right? Let's raise the following theoretical scenario. Even if tomorrow there's a peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, let's say tomorrow, miraculously, Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Abbas, the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian President meet and they sign a historic peace agreement. Does that mean Israel doesn't have security threats? I think the answer, unfortunately, is the opposite. We know in the past, when Rabin signed the Oslo agreements, and it was a very optimistic period in the process, we actually saw an increase in suicide bombings. It was a very difficult period from a security point of view, precisely because those groups who oppose peace become energized. And I remember after the Oslo agreements, during the exact same period where we were pulling out of communities in the West Bank and handing them over to the Palestinian Authority, you had a wave of suicide bombings that was very, very, very problematic. And then we were told they're doing it because they're against peace. And if they do attacks today, we're told they're doing it because there's no peace process. On the contrary, they can't both be right. What is right is these groups deny Israel's right to exist in any border. I think that's the fundamental truth. So if tomorrow Israel was to sign a peace treaty with the Palestinians, so what does Mr. Assad do? Does he support that? Or what do the Iranians do? And what does Hezbollah do? And what does Islamic Jihad do? And so you have to be able to protect the peace. And if you don't have security intertwined with a peace arrangement, it's not going to survive. It's not going to have staying power. And that's why I think Rabin in that last speech spoke very strongly that Israel needs to have secure borders and we have to have control of vital areas in any peace treaty, because if we can't defend the peace and we can't defend ourselves, the peace won't continue. We have to be able to protect ourselves.
So Judith, who's the editor of Wessex Jewish News in Bournemouth there, she says, well, going back further, why didn't Israel annex the West Bank when it had the chance after the Six-Day War? And what's the rationale for making the moves within what is referred to as annexation now, you say extending sovereignty? What is Israel going to gain by doing this now that it couldn't have gained all those years ago?
So there is, as you know, Israel in 1981 extended our sovereignty to the Golan Heights. And that was something that Prime Minister Menachem Begin did. So we have done it in territories that we've considered very important in the past. And when we did that, of course, all the Golan residents were offered Israeli citizenship, yes, which is a very important precedent. Vis-a-vis the West Bank and extending sovereignty there, I think we have a situation today where it's possible that we can get some international support for this act, which we couldn't have got in the past, specifically from the United States, but maybe not only. And so we would be irresponsible not to explore the possibility.
Now then, everything that happens in Israel, we feel in this country has an impact here. And Jacqueline, who's a member, we have a coffee break meeting every week. She's a member of that group. And she says, we've been shocked by the resurgence of anti-Semitism here. I think everybody never thought this would happen again here. And it just goes to show it's never going to go away. And she's concerned that the current talk around, this proposed peace treaty or the moves towards a peace treaty is only going to provoke anti-Israel sentiment, but also anti-Semitism. And it's really the moderate, the middle ground. It's not going to be the hard left or the extreme right. It's the middle ground who is taking against it. And won't that just sort of kill off the possibility of having a negotiated peace? Is the Israeli government listening to what problems we have here in terms of how it's going to affect our politicians who will go along and support a possible peace?
So first of all, I don't think it excludes the possibility of peace. I don't think it even excludes the possibility of two states for two peoples, which is what the international community believes. I mean, if Rabin believed that you could keep part of the territories and still get peace, I think that's not a bad benchmark for many other people to think about, yes? Um, I think that's the important point. But I'm not answering your question. You asked me something at the beginning where, yes, about British Jews.
Yes.
So first of all, and the British government having a different opinion. Israel has declared Jerusalem our capital. I think 2 years ago, the Americans officially recognized that and they moved their embassy to Jerusalem. The British government has not done so. The British government said, I think in a statement, that they have no plans to move their embassy from Tel Aviv. And I think at the United Nations, they actually voted against the Americans for moving their embassy. So you don't agree on everything. It's a pity. I'd like to tell you, as Israeli ambassador, I convinced the British government that they could move their embassy to Jerusalem. I didn't succeed. And you can't win them all. But the truth is that we have divisions, and that you say on this issue of extending sovereignty that we have a disagreement with the British government. Of course I know, they tell me. I hear their opinion. And obviously in our decision-making process, that's factored in as conversations that we have with UK Jewry are factored in. But does that mean if the British government is against that, we have to automatically adopt their position? No, it doesn't work that way in international relations. We factor it in as we factor in other issues. That's the way it works in international diplomacy. I mean, if I talk about the embassy issue, I mean, it's almost discrimination against Israel, because there's an international norm that says every country gets to choose its own capital city, and that the rest of the international community recognizes that right. Right? That's an international norm. And you know how we know that? We know that because there are some countries who've actually changed their capital cities. The Brazilians changed their capital city to Brasilia, the Chinese from Nanjing to Beijing, yes, the Turks from Istanbul to Ankara. And most recently, and most of us should remember this, at least people of my age and above remember this, the Germans changed their capital city from Bonn to Berlin after unification. And we know Mrs. Thatcher in this country wasn't so hot on that. She wasn't so excited about it. But no one denied the right of the German people to choose their own capital, despite all the history and the baggage, yes? And there's not a single embassy left in Bonn. All the embassies are in Berlin. It's only in the case of Israel is this international norm not applied. They say, no, you don't have the right to choose your own capital city, and we don't respect that right. And that is something that is wrong. Now, if people say to me, oh, yes, but, Jerusalem, there's a debate. Sorry, if there's a debate, if the UN says everything over 67 lines is not sovereign Israel, so logically, everything inside the 67 lines is Israel, even from that perspective, yes? Why can't you have a UK embassy in that part of Jerusalem?
Well, Gwendolyn says, can you guarantee that Jerusalem will never be divided, that it will always be in Israel?
I can tell you that the policy of the Israeli government is clear, that Jerusalem in any constellation will remain the united capital of Israel. And you should know that only since Israel reunited the city in 1967 have the faiths of all communities been respected. Because what is the reality in Jerusalem since unification in 67? The holy sites of all faiths are protected. And in the Middle East, and we've seen terrible things in the Middle East with mosques and churches and being destroyed by extremists, yes, bombs going off, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, other places where religious sites have been destroyed. Israel rigorously safeguards all the holy sites of all faiths. And more than that, in our system, we allow each religious community to autonomously administer its own religious sites. So the Muslim Waqf, it autonomously runs the Muslim holy sites. The different churches autonomously administer the different Christian holy sites, according to the agreements between the different churches, which we don't get involved in. And of course, the rabbinate in Israel runs the Jewish holy sites. And there's a debate about that with non-Orthodox Jews, I understand. But the principle is that every different community autonomously administers its own holy sites. And all the holy sites are protected. Now, that has only happened since Israel reunited the city. Before that, we couldn't go to our holy sites. We couldn't go to the Kotel. And so I think people who are interested in Jerusalem, who love the city of Jerusalem, who want to see all faiths practicing their beliefs in freedom and security, to say that that would happen without Israeli control in a unified city under Israeli sovereignty, I think that's a jump into the unknown.
Well, we've just got a couple of minutes left, and so I just want to ask in those 2 minutes, there's two topics. Maybe we can cover them a little bit. It's about Israel and its neighbors, and we've talked about the internal politics, and we've talked about the relationship with governments like the UK and how that affects it. But what about the threat through this peace process, which is being promoted by America? And what about the threat of Iran starting a new Middle East war based on that? And you know, they are a growing military power and growing with more and more influence. So is that just always going to be in the equation? And I'll come to another question after which is about the future of Israel. But for what about its neighbors? Are they not always going to be a threat?
So I'll answer both questions because I have to run it at 1:30, and I apologize. But to answer your question, Iran doesn't always have to be a threat. Iran in the past had a good relationship with Israel. Before the revolution, we had a good relationship with the monarchy there. And the trouble is the people who took power after the revolution, ideologically are committed to Israel's destruction. And the Iranians are a serious threat. They've got a missile program that threatens us. They've got a nuclear program that threatens everyone. They've got, they support terrorism, they support Hamas, Hezbollah, and not just support vocally, but in a very tangible way in financing and arming and training. They are doing all sorts of nefarious activities in places like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. The good news is that the Iranian threat has brought us and the Arab states together. It's one of the reasons for the rapprochement between us and the Arab countries, because common enemies have brought us together. And that's the positive side. But Iran is a serious threat. And as you know from reading the newspapers, every now and then the Israeli military plays a little knock on the door to different Iranian military installations in Syria, because they're trying to build up in Syria a forward position to attack us from. And we are not allowing that to happen. And so there's a constant tension there. There's a conflict here. We say the Iranians have to leave Syria. There's no reason why there should be Iranian military personnel in Syria. They should be out, and we will encourage them to leave. And that's what we're doing. On your question of the future of Israel, and I know we have to be brief because time's running out, but I want you to know that I'm very optimistic about Israel's future. I'm very optimistic. I'm very upbeat. I see my children, I see the younger people in Israel, the younger generation, full of energy and dynamism and wanting to succeed. If I think where we were, as I said before, in 1948 and where we are today in 2020, if you look at the trajectory of where we've come from and the challenges we've overcome, it gives me great confidence of what we can do in the next decades. And I just say two reasons to be optimistic. Number one, the new relations with the Arab countries. Who would have thought that Israel would be speaking to so many Arab countries? Who would have thought that Israel would be increasingly seen as a legitimate part of the region? Who would have thought that more and more Arab governments would be reaching out and wanting to talk to Israel? So on that side, it gives me optimism for a better future. And also the Israeli economy. I mean, Israeli high tech has become renowned across the planet, Israeli innovation. And in many ways, Israel is uniquely positioned to succeed in the 21st century, because what we do well in Israel is what the 21st century economy appears to be all about. So the politics in the macro sense, relations with the Arab world are looking increasingly positive. The trajectory there looks good. The Israeli economy looks like it's going to continue to be one of the fastest growing economies in the developed world, as we have been. And we put all that together, that's a combination of success. And I'm going back to Israel this summer. I'll finish my posting, and I am confident and optimistic about Israel's future. And I hope you can.
In two words, sorry, I apologize. In 2 words, what do you think is the greatest challenge in that future?
To Israel?
Yeah.
Those countries that we don't yet talk to, those that are hostile with us, knowing to deal with the threats and seizing the opportunities. Once again, you don't do yourself a favor by ignoring a threat, but you also don't do yourself a favor by not seizing an opportunity where they exist. And that's what we've got to navigate.
Ambassador Mark Regev, thank you so much for meeting so many small communities represented here today. Thank you so much again.
My pleasure, and I want to thank especially the leadership of all the small communities. I know the important job you do in maintaining Jewish life in England and across the United Kingdom. And I want to say thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the event this morning. Thank you all for coming. You can catch up with it again on the YouTube channel, and have a good morning. Thank you all for coming.